at the end. Okay, so now we are officially being recorded. So just remember that if you're watching this recording, please make note of your own professional development activity. As I was saying, there will be time for questions at the end of Florence's talk. And make sure you drop your questions here in the chat box. All right, so today, as I said, we're going to have Florence, and originally she was going to be joined by Pilar, but unfortunately Pilar could not be with us today, but I'm sure she's watching the recording in the future. So hi, Pilar. Whenever you're watching this, let me introduce her. Pilar Prieto is an ICREA research professor at the Department of Translation and Language Studies at Universitat Pompeu Fabra, Barcelona, Catalonia. Her research focuses on the communicative role of prosody and gesture in language, as well as the significance in language development and learning. And Florence Baills is a French teacher and fellow researcher in the phonetics group at the University of Cologne, Germany. Her research is centered on the role of prosody. Even the dog got super excited now that I got to introduce you, Florence. Her research is centered on the role of prosody, gesture, and music in the acquisition of foreign language. And they're going to talk about embodied pronunciation. So we are very excited. It's going to be so cool. Florence, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for this nice introduction. So I hope I live to your expectations. Let me share my screen. Can you hear me well? It's not too loud, not too, okay.
It's perfect.
Because I have these casks that are like, yes, I don't hear myself very well. Okay, share sound. Here, this one. Sorry, it's not this one. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, yeah. All right. Okay, so the title of today's webinar is Embodied Pronunciation Instruction, and I'm going to talk about empirical evidence and recent findings from our research group, which is called Grupo de Estudos da Prosodia. So it's a group about studies on prosody, and Pilar is the supervisor of this group. She's the main researcher of this group. And I have been doing my PhD research with her, and you'll see that the studies I'm going to present today, they are all in collaboration with Pilar Prieto. And in my case, I am either the main author or the co-author of the studies. Right, so before we start, I'd like for you to think a little bit about how you use your hands or your body in the classroom and to what purpose. Just quickly say what kind of movement do you use and what for, right? Could you answer that in the chat? Whatever comes to your mind. And it doesn't have to be about pronunciation. To get students into pair, to support understanding. So then, phrase placement, okay. Everywhere, not just in the classroom. Yes, we move our hands all the time. That's true. Yeah. To engage students, very nice. Classroom management and gesture and facial expressions, very important. And also head movement, head nods, yes. Standing up, sitting down. Okay, yeah, so whole body movement, we also talk about this. Yeah. Oh, not too much control over them. It's true. It's part of your cognitive system. It's part of your language. You don't really think about them. Yeah. To motivate the learners. Yes. Okay. So Yes, the music of intonation, we'll talk about that. Yes, facial expressions, super cool. So you use your hands, right? All the times, and you use your body and you use your face to communicate. In fact, human communication is multimodal, right? In everything we do. So it involves dynamic interactions of the verbal content, our gestures and facial expressions, and also our prosody. That means how we use intonation, how we use rhythm if we speak, faster, if we make pauses, but also the intensity in our speech, right? Some syllable we will really emphasize, for example, right? So it's everywhere, and it serves many, many, many purposes in communication. And it also serves purpose in pronunciation instructions, which is our topic today. So what do we mean by embodied, right? So of course, the bulk of it is gestures, but not only gestures. We will also talk about kinesthetic movements. That means movements that involve some touching, right? For example, in today's presentation, hand clapping, right? And last but not least, whole body movements. So we also see in a study that we can use our whole body to make students aware of prosody, of the music of the language. Okay, so what does embodied pronunciation instruction deal with? So we can really look at segmental features, specific speech sound, and how a gesture can represent this sound. And this will be our first topic. But we can also look at how we can embody suprasegmental features, right? These two things. So our roadmap is first to look at a little bit the theory, what is behind embodied learning. So the embodied cognition paradigm, but also this strong speech gesture alignment, which is everywhere in communication. And the second part will be to talk about all the gestures and movement that we've been testing in our studies. So segments, rhythm, and prosody, all of this. Okay, let's start. For example, so before we dive into the studies, I'd like to show an example. This is a pronunciation class for L2 French. And so these teachers are using what is called the verbotonal method. So maybe some of you are aware of this method. It's mainly used for French, and it makes a great use of gesture generally. So let's see a little bit how it looks like.
Attention, parce que ça fait que j'ai pas assez, que j'ai pas assez d'huile.
Que j'ai pas assez d'huile.
Voilà, c'est ça. Mais là, elle ne martèle plus, ça fait on va rentrer à pied.
On va rentrer à pied.
Ok, c'est ça, c'est bien.
Très bien. J'ai mal à la tête.
J'ai mal à la tête.
Super.
J'ai mal à la tête. J'ai mal à la tête.
J'ai mal à la tête.
Est-ce que tu fais du sport?
Est-ce que tu fais du sport?
Okay, so many gestures, but does it work really? So the work we have been carried on in the past few years, and for my PhD dissertation is really to check if this is effective, right? Sorry. Okay. So about the theory, embodied cognition or embodied learning, what does that mean? It means that cognition and learning do not only take place in our brain, but also in our physical body, and also thanks to our senses. So thanks to our sensory motor experiences, we will create our representations of the world, right? We need them to create these representations. It's not that everything is taking place in the brain. So according to the grounding by interaction hypothesis, this sensory and motor information, they provide an enhanced, richer version of our conceptual representations. They make them more precise, right? And what is very important is a concept of reenactment. When we see an action, okay, we perceive it, we memorize it as an action, and afterwards we are able to reenact it, to reactivate this experience and action in our brain. Concretely, it means that when we think about this action, our motor, like the neurons that involve motor actions, are also activated in our brain. And so this is the perceptive function, I'd say, of embodied cognition, perception. But there is also mimesis. So mimesis is a concept according to which we need imitation to learn. So imitation of verbal content and also on non-verbal behavior. And this is how we learn since early childhood, right? Babies learn that way. Part of it, they learn that way by imitating. And it's also part of embodied cognition, but more on the production side. So we need both perception and production. Now, regarding speech gesture alignment, so there is a very tight coupling between speech and gesture in time and also in semantic functions. So semantic functions means that the verbal message and what you show with your hand will be connected. It can say the same thing. For example, oh, this is a ball, right? Or I'm playing with a ball, right? And I'm playing with a ball. So this is not exactly ball, but you know, you're playing with the ball. And also, so very importantly, this connection with time. And gestures are anchored to prosodic structure, which means that the most prominent part of gestures, what is called apex in our jargon, apex. So this is the most prominent part, tends to occur with the most prominent part of speech. So for example, intonation pitch, right? That's one thing. Another thing is that people observe that gestures, they also start and end at the same time as a prosodic phrases. Okay, so it's really a common system, let's say, right? And that's important because when you learn a language, then you can really use your hands to help you achieve this alignment, right? I achieve this. Okay. Now I'm going to start talking about the studies, but before I start, I'd like to present our methodology just now for, once for all, because it's the same methodology for all the studies. And I think it's very important to understand how this experimental scientific design works, right? So these are very controlled design where we compare usually two groups of participants, of subjects. That's why it's called between subjects experiment. So usually we have two or more groups. One is always a control group, the baseline group, and then an experimental group, which in our case will be the group which is embodied, which is using embodied training, okay? So we have these two groups. The first thing they do is a pre-test where we record their speech. We need to know how they do first, how well they do, okay? So both groups, they do the same. They record speech samples. So it can be imitation of words or sentences, depending on the proficiency of the participants in the language they are learning. It can also be oral reading. Okay, oral reading is frequently used in our tasks, in pre-test and post-test tasks. Then they do the training phase. So in the training phase, the two groups, they do very similar things. It needs to be almost the same. Everything should be the same, except that one group we have gesture or movement and the other won't. Okay, so basically they learn the same, they have the same stimuli, but they don't learn it the same way. And in our case, we use a lot of audiovisual stimuli, which help us control very well for potential differences between the groups. So audiovisual stimuli, videos, basically. And during these training sessions, we ask the participants to imitate what they see from the instructor. And you'll get the chance to see many examples during this presentation. Okay, after that, the participants, they again record exactly the same as what they recorded before training. Why? Because we need to compare if they improved on this particular speech, these particular items we asked them to repeat or to read, okay? When we have all this data, we can do two things to assess them. We can do ratings, which means we will ask native speakers to give an evaluation of how well they pronounce the words or the sentences they have been recording. So it can be accentedness, it can be comprehensibility, it can be fluency, right? You can give perceptual ratings on different dimensions on pronunciation. And there is also the possibility to do acoustic analysis. That is, I really want to know what happens in particular in that sound. So what I will do is an acoustic analysis of this particular sound, and if there is a difference between pre-test and post-test, okay? And when we have all these numbers, we run statistics. And the statistics, what they say is that they tell us, oh, this is significant. There is significant difference here, or there isn't. And if we find a statistical difference between groups or between pre-test and post-test, what it tells us is that our results, our finding, the training we've been giving there during this very controlled, in this very controlled setting, can be reproduced and can work with other participants. Okay, so that's roughly the methodology of all these experiments. Okay. So the first gestures I'd like to talk about, they are not on prosody, they are on segments, because I think it's worth also talking about these gestures. They are called, we have called them hand articulatory gestures because they take one articulatory property of phonation and they try to visualize it, represent it in space with the hands. Mm-hmm. So I'll present you this study, which has been carried out by Penley and Xiaotonxi also as first authors, where they asked Catalan learners, naive learners, which means they didn't know anything of Chinese. So they asked these participants to learn aspirated plosive and aspirated affricates in a very short training where they had to imitate the sounds. So what's interesting with these sounds is that aspirated plosive have a stronger elbows, okay, and aspirated affricates have a longer frication duration than their unaspirated counterpart, and this doesn't exist in Catalan, okay, in the native language of our participants. So it's a difficult sound to produce for them. Let me show you an example of how the training looked like. So this is a gesture condition.
鼻炎
This is
皮炎
this is the aspirated one.
鼻炎
Unaspirated,
皮炎
aspirated. And this is the no gesture condition.
鼻炎皮炎
鼻炎皮炎
Okay. So you have an idea of what they were doing during training. Mm-hmm. So in the case of these studies, we analyzed the VOT, the duration of at the beginning of the production of the sound, right? And we found that, so the participants, do I see my mouse? Yes, here. Okay, so in the group that didn't do any gesture, there is no change in the VOT, while in our gesture group, there is longer VOT, we show that the participants, they produce better our aspirated plosive. But the same gesture for aspirated affricates didn't work. We don't have this finding. So what does that mean? Is that this gesture, which mimics the air burst, worked for plosive, but didn't work for affricates. This mimic air burst, but they cannot mimic frication. Okay, so other studies by other groups, other researchers have also looked at unreleased stop and released stop. So this would be black pen and to speak, right? And this was proved useful. Other studies have looked at Spanish. So this would symbolize lip rounding, like in La Nube, and this works. But for example, these gestures, which mimics the tongue, the movement of the tongue when pronouncing this sound, like in La Zeta, was not well understood by the participants. So here the conclusion would be that gesture representing a particular property of sound is useful first when the sound is particularly difficult to produce, but that it's very important that the participants imitate correctly the gesture, and also that the metaphor of the gesture must be very clear, okay? For like, this was very clear that it was rounding of the lips, but it was not clear that this was for the tongue movement. And the same as in our studies, this was not representative of frication. Okay. So let's start talking about prosody, starting with rhythm. Some gesture and movement are really helpful to highlight rhythm. So we will first look at beat gestures and then at hand clapping. Okay, so regarding beat gestures, there are different types of speech gestures. You may be aware of it already, but iconic and metaphoric gestures, they are related to the semantic content of words, like pinch. Deictic gestures are basically pointing gestures, but for our purpose, we look at beat gestures. So beat gestures, what are they? They are spontaneously produced biphasic movements of the hands. They are super frequently used. They are the most frequently used. They are closely temporally aligned to prosodic characteristics of speech, and they also typically occur on stress accented syllables, right? So they mark rhythm, but also they can mark focus, and they can also mark discourse structure. So they have this function. In the study I'll talk about now, we had 18 Catalan learners of English, and so English and Catalan, they are different in the way they realize phrasal prominence, because English is famous to be more stress time language, while Catalan is like mostly known as a syllable time language. So it's difficult for Catalan learners to reach like to produce prominence as in a stress time language. Okay, so as pre and post test, we asked participants to imagine themselves in certain types of situation where they have to communicate with someone. Okay, so for example, here you're in a lecture at the university, you didn't hear what the professor just said, and I'd like to ask your friends to repeat it for you. So what will you say to your friends? Record your response. And then there were easy items, so things that were easy to say, and difficult items. During the training, so in these two studies, in study one, we compared beat gesture observed versus no beat gestures, and in the second, beat gesture observed versus beat gesture produced. So as before, I can show you how it looked like.
Sorry, what did the professor just say? I couldn't hear him.
This would be with beat understand.
Sorry, what did the professor just say? I couldn't hear him.
Okay. All right. So what did we find? In this graph, what you see is the mean improvement. Okay. So in the beat group, you see that for the easy items, there was not much improvement, but for the difficult items, beat gesture helped a lot more. Okay. Whereas in the no-beat condition, it was the other way around. Then, in the second study, we compared observing beat gesture versus producing beat gestures. So here the graph is different. So you have the mean rating scores. It was on a scale from 1 to 7, and then accentedness scores are expected here to decrease because you're thinking decreasing your accentedness as something positive in that case. All right. So you see at pre-test, there was no difference between the groups, while at post-test, there was a significant difference between the groups, which means that doing the gesture helped more than observing them in that case. But you also see, which is the two last bars on the right, that this didn't work for unrelated items. That means items that were not trained during the training phase. So new situations that we asked at post-test. So we had no effect of gesture in there. And what does it mean? These trainings are very short. So obviously, I think for what we call generalization to new items, repetition is the key. Doing more and more of that kind of activities would be maybe the way to solve this issue. So now let's talk about hand clapping, which is also a specific embodied activity, which is completely focused on rhythm and due to its relationship to music, probably, right? It's easily adaptable for children. In fact, I've seen that hand clapping is used frequently to teach phonics in English, for example. And it's also very nice because it triggers positive emotions, especially in the case of children. So here we have 2 studies on this topic, which are exactly the same, but in different type of population, children and adolescents. So we taught them new words through hand clapping, okay, or without it, right? So as I said, we have Catalan children and Chinese adolescents, which will go through the same experiment, the same training. But the difference is that the words, the items they are going to learn, they are cognate for Catalan speakers. That means they are very similar, but they are very different for Chinese. Let me show you the items. These are 20 French words. This time it was with French, right? So in Catalan, balcon is balcó, right? So it's very similar, but the pronunciation is different. So that's why we wanted to see what happens there. And in addition, what's interesting with French is that primary stress is final, is at the end of the word, and is realized by a lengthening of the syllable, more specifically a lengthening of the vowel. So if you listen to a French native speaker pronounce this word, which is marmalade, confiture.
Confiture.
And if you listen to, for example, to a Chinese speaker pronounce this word,
confiture,
you see that the last syllable is completely truncated, right? So we want to see if hand clapping can help there specifically. Okay, let's watch our materials. So you see that we have used images basically because we don't want written text to interfere, especially with children, right? Or with Chinese participants who doesn't have the same alphabet. So we used images to illustrate the words they had to learn how to pronounce. Wait, I want this one first.
Pizza. Pizza.
And see.
Pizza. Pizza.
Okay, that's an example.
Pizza.
So what did we find? So this is experiment 4 with children. We found that in the no clapping group, there was not really difference in terms of accentedness, right? They didn't improve much before and after training, I mean. Whereas in the clapping group, we see that their accentedness decreased significantly. However, for our Chinese participants, we don't see any effect in none of the groups. Okay, so maybe there could be something here, but it's not significant. So if we look at final lengthening here, it's different. So we see, for example, that here the syllable was longer at post-test in the clapping group, but didn't change in the non-clapping group. And in the Chinese participants, it's the same. If we look at the clapping group, we see here that the final vowel was longer and the final syllable was longer. Okay, so here we reach our aim, although it did not transform into accentedness ratings. Our raters, it seems that they were not sensitive to this change. Okay, so far we saw that beta gestures and hand clapping highlight the rhythmic structure of the target language and help improve L2 pronunciation. In this relatively short embodied rhythmic training, right? It seems to be effective at different levels of proficiency. So naive learners, but also intermediate learners of English, for example, as we've seen. Okay, what would happen at the sentence level? Right, it's difficult to teach prosody, to teach intonation, but it's also crucial. It's also very important because it has an effect on the pragmatic abilities of our learners. They may make pragmatic mistakes because of their intonation. We all know that, right? So applying gesture at the sentence level may help solve this issue or try to solve this issue. So how do we highlight prosody? Okay, we will see that we can highlight prosody thanks to prosodic gestures, but also through embodied music. Okay, it sounds a little bit weird, but let's see what you think about it afterwards. So experiment 6 and 7 ask if melodic and embodied training improve L2 pronunciation, and also in collaboration with external researchers from other groups like Charlotte Alazar and also Lorraine Baquet. Right, so melodic gestures. So if you see in this image in the middle, you see that this line, this represents pitch. It's made with a computer program that is called Pratt, right? So you can see the formats of the each sound, right? And you can also see the pitch contours, right? So with this gesture, we want to mimic the pitch contours at the sentence level, but we also want to make it quite schematic. So, okay, it goes up and then it goes down. You don't need to be very specific in the contour, but try to keep like the main parts, right? The most important parts of the pitch contours, okay? And this can be produced together with the sentence itself. So in this case, it's French again. Je suis désolé, votre lettre n'est pas là. I'm sorry, but your letter is not here. Je suis désolé, votre lettre n'est pas là. So very schematic. But you can also use it with logatom, which is what they do in these verbotonal methods. They use it with logatom, and logatom is a single syllable that you will repeat instead of the syllable of the sentence in order to focus on prosody. to get rid of the semantic content of the sentence. And in this case, it would sound something like da 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 da, right? Da 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 da, something like that. So these are our melodic gestures. Here we looked at how they worked with logatoms and how they worked with speech in these two different studies with Catalan learners of French. These are true learners of French, and we integrate our pronunciation instruction within their French classes at university. So it was around 30 minutes in 3 different sessions. For the first study, it was on site, it was before pandemia. So they were in interpretation booth and they were working isolated, but still during class. And then for the second study, it was online because it was during pandemia, but it worked just fine. Another difference between the two studies is that study 6 worked on suprasegmental features, focused on suprasegmental features, and we didn't control really on the segments within the materials. I'll show you materials just afterwards. I'll show you our materials. And in study 7, we also wanted to see if our prosodic training would also work on target sounds that are difficult. And so we increased the number of difficult sounds within each of our text, the material we use. So let's have a look at this. We worked with short dialogue in French that they had to read aloud. Okay, so this one is an example for study 6, right? They were not very long, but they had really to work on their intonation because they were always like situations. For example, here, a young girl wants to go out, wants to go to the movies with friends, but the dad doesn't want her to go out. And so they have this fight. So that you need to read this with correct intonation, right? Try to pass all the information through your intonation. Okay. So I'll show you an example of the gesture with logatom and the gesture with speech. I'm not going to show you without because you saw that it's exactly the same, but without moving the hands, right? So let's see.
Da 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 da. Mais le facteur n'est pas rentré de sa tournée.
So you see here, they do logatom, they do gesture, but then they also listen to speech. Otherwise, it's not fair. You also need to refer to the sentence. And this would be an example.
Juste un peu mal au cœur.
For the other study. Right. Okay. When they finished this 30-minute training on dialogue, they also had the chance to see native speaker interpret this dialogue. So let me show you. So in both groups, right, the control group and also the gesture group would be able to see that.
Papa, je peux aller au cinéma?
Bah, je regrette, mais tu as cours demain. Je ne veux pas que tu te couches tard.
Mais Lisa, elle a la permission.
Eh bien, Lisa, c'est Lisa. Toi, c'est toi.
Mais papa!
Non, ça suffit. Tu ne discutes pas.
Il y en a marre, c'est toujours la même chose.
Non, c'est non. Et tu ne vas pas sur ce ton.
Right. So I think it's really nice that they were not only doing training, but also had, an idea of how it should be. And it makes this like not that experimental in the end, right? Not only experimental, let's say, but also pedagogically relevant. Okay, so what did we find? So in the study 6, what we compared was embodied logatom against speech only, but we also had an intermediate condition with logatom only, which could be considered as a prosodic training, but non-embodied, okay, non-embodied prosodic training. So for accentedness, we see that all the groups improved after the 3 sessions, right? They all improved, they practiced a lot, but we see an interaction, a significant interaction here also between speech only and embodied logatom. And that means that these guys, they improved significantly more than this one, okay? So this happened for accentedness, and this also happened for suprasegmental features. For suprasegmental features, same. They improved significantly more in the embodied logatom group. You may think here, but accentedness is going up, and I'm going to explain why. It's because we had 5 different measures, and it made sense for the rest of the measure that going up would mean improvement. So we did not want to change this dynamic. So we also thought, let's do the same for accentedness so that the raters, they have the same, you know, action in mind, right? They will do the same. We also measured fluency, comprehensibility, and segmental features. And in that case, we didn't find any difference. So there may be different explanation. For example, these participants were already intermediate learners of French and they were very comprehensible, or maybe you would need more training to see true effects on these measures. So there were tendencies, but they did not reach significance, right? With accentedness, you see it's a lot more because people tend to rate lower accentedness and to be more harsh on accentedness ratings than on fluency rating or comprehensibility ratings. Okay, and so for the second study where we compared embodied speech versus speech only, so this would be speech only and there is no significant difference. And this is so our embodied speech, and you see an increased improvement. So the third bar means delayed post-test, because in the case of the studies, we also asked participants to do again an oral reading after 1 week after the post-test. So we had the 3 session, 1 week later the post-test, and 1 week later the delayed post-test. And you see that the gesture helped retain the pronunciation in the case of accentedness. Then what we also did in this study is an acoustic analysis of the difficult sounds. So in that case, front-rounded vowels. So more fronted vowels, you expect higher F2 values in the phoneme analysis. So if F2 values are higher, it means a better pronunciation. And you see here that in the case of the sound U, there is a significant improvement, and not in the embodied speech, but not in the other group, in the control group. The same for the sound E, and the same for the sound E, which are 3 difficult sounds in French for Catalan speakers. Okay, we're getting there. I see it's already 45. I think I need 5 more minutes and I'll be done. So the training sessions have been carried out during classes this time. So they are more adapted to the classroom, which I think is the ultimate motive, right? You want to be able to do pronunciation instruction in class, adapt your experimental methods to the classroom. Both studies showed a significant improvement in oral reading, accentedness, suprasegmental features in the embodied cognition, yet not on comprehensibility and fluency, and I said a little bit about that. And interestingly, we also found a positive effect of prosodic embodied training on the pronunciation of vowels and maintained effects at delayed post-test. So that would mean that here in that case, our embodied prosodic training was what it has done. It's scaffold L2 speech, gives a framework for the speech to improve within this frame, right? Okay. Let's talk about our last study. Okay, so embodied music training. So we want to increase the awareness of our learner regarding prosody, how to make them understand that there is melody, there is rhythm, there is accent in language, and that this is important for pronunciation. Well, we can use music and we can use embodied music. So body movement leads to stronger improvement in rhythmic abilities, not related to language, but this has been studied quite well so far, right? It promotes positive emotions and experience. And in fact, adding to this, working in groups also increases social bonding. It's crucial for motivation and for the willingness to participate and to learn, right? So until now, we have been doing individual experiments, but this time we want to do it really as a group. So this is a topic of study 8, which has been the leader has been Yuan Zhang in this study. It's not yet published, it's submitted. So we want to see the effect of embodied music training without any speech input. There is no language here, on oral reading in English, and so because our participants are learning English, and imitation pronunciation. Okay. So we asked 15 Chinese adolescents to participate in 3 45-minute sessions after school. It took place at school with the music teachers, but outside of the classes hours, okay? And we compared embodied music training based on rhythmic and melodic activities, which were inspired from the Dalcroze methodology. I don't know if you know it, but I can give you more information afterwards if you want, against traditional music classes more focused on the theory of music or culture on songs, for example, and traditional songs, that kind of thing. Right. Okay. So you see, this would be, for example, the lesson plan for one session with 4 different activities, focusing on moving to the beat, moving to the rhythm, moving to the accent, right? So, and everything with music and with different activities. Here is one activities that the children have been doing. I cannot show you a video of the children, but just this image. So for example, here they listen to music, and whenever there was an accent, a strong accent, they had to touch the balloon with their finger, right? They had to do that. Here I can show you this example because it's public on the web, so it's another activity that they have been doing also in our session. So you see here, it's the same, it's to focus on accent. So they need to know when accent will come and do as if they would smash a ball with a tennis racket when the accent is coming. So it's lots of, you know, you need to know when the accent will come. You need to anticipate it. And that's good training for rhythm. Okay. So what did we find? So first, the first task was a multi-language imitation task. So we asked them to listen and repeat 2 sentences in 8 different languages that they didn't know at all. And we just compare their pronunciation before this 3 sessions of embodied music training and after. And we see here an improvement here in accentedness here. And we see that it doesn't happen in the non-embodied music group. And this is significant. Okay, this is a significant difference. And the same happens even more, I'd say, in a sentence reading task in L2 English, right? In the embodied music group, there is a significant improvement. And here there isn't. Okay. So as the conclusion, I've been showing very quickly many experimental studies that looked at the effects of embodied pronunciation training. And you've seen a variety of tools to teach pronunciation. Some were more natural, like beat gestures, maybe hand clapping can be also considered as natural. And you've seen also more pedagogical gesture, which are really designed to teach something specific, like our hand articulatory gestures. And I'd say that both are very useful to teach pronunciation. So you may ask, how or when do I use the gesture and the movement? So you can use them on the spot. So you detect that you have a learner that has a problem with a specific pronunciation and say, oh, let's correct it and let's use a gesture. And this would be out on spot. But here it is very difficult because how do you know you're using the right gestures, right? So you need to know what have been tested, or you can also test yourself your own gestures and see if they work. In the end, we are very creative. Teachers are very creative. And then you can also organize pronunciation training sessions, like how we've been doing. They can be very short, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. They can be longer, 30 minutes, 45 minutes. But then you need experimentally tested materials, and maybe you need also the lesson plans. So this is our next step in this work, is to upload all our materials in this web page, which is new, Tools for the Second Language Research and Teaching, which has been created by fellow researchers in second language pronunciation research. So they have not that much work with gesture and more with other type of training, but very nice, very interesting also. And they have created this web page to host experimental material that has been tested, improved, useful. And so the next step is to create lesson plans for the teachers and materials for the participants, for the learners, so that this can be, downloaded and actually used by the teachers. Okay, so thank you very much for listening. I'm not on time, but I think it's fine. I've been able to say everything I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Florence. And now Victor has some questions from the audience for you.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Florence. We've had some questions from the audience here. We're going along. Going back at the very beginning, there was one that by you asking about the training.
Yes, it's true that I haven't been able to go into much details on our training design, because I thought it was interesting to see many gestures, many different types of gestures and movements.
There was a question, Florence, by Bashir Ahmad. He's asking, how long did the training stage take after the pretest? And are all participants at the same level? Because you mentioned levels are different, right?
Yes, it really depends on the study. So we started with very experimental studies in the lab. So they were very short, could be 5-10 minutes. I didn't speak about all the studies we've done on perception, on L2 perception, and only spoke about pronunciation, studies on pronunciation. We also have a bunch of study on perception and how gesture help you perceive a language, right? But we start with that, and with very short, like 5-10 minutes training phase. So pre-test, immediately after that training phase. So pre-test was maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes of training, and 5 minutes of post-test. So in total, maybe 20 minutes, very, very short. We started like that. And we started also with naive participants, but because there are so many things to control with L2 learners, I didn't even mention it, but we control for musical abilities, for working memory, for, their grades at school in the language, if they know other foreign languages. Like, we have to control all of this. And when we do the statistics, we need to input all of this in our models also, right? So, yeah.
but still, it's very good to see that with so little training, they were able to show significant changes.
Yes, it's amazing. Hmm.
And there was a question by Marie van der Meer. She asked you, how did you select your raters and what were their rating criteria?
So rating criteria really native speakers. So the first studies, they were random native speakers, really. Like they should not be linguists, they should not be teachers, they should be out of this world. And then for the last studies, so for example, for the imitation in 8 languages, we had 2 raters, but random from these languages. Really, find rate is quite complicated to find raters for Tagalog or raters for. And for the studies that we have for French, we have integrated in the classroom. We decided to hire teachers to rate there.
You also
French teachers, yes.
Beginning with that, you have also got your experience as a French language teacher, right? And because Stella Phil here is asking how you recommend using hand clapping for ESL training. So even though you're teaching French, we saw that lots of things are very relatable. So can you go over a little bit how you use hand clapping?
How using clapping? Yeah, so the thing is with hand clapping, first is really nice because you see that some of your learners, they cannot pronounce, they cannot know, they have problems to find the number of syllables in a word, for example. So first, you can clap on each syllable, and then this helps them understand how many syllables we have in this word. For French, you have also this liaison issue, like you can link 2 words and then the number of syllables changes. So it's also helpful for this, like to make them understand that this is the same syllable, even if there are 2 separate words. And what we looked at final lengthening, so it was not only structuring the word, but also the final lengthening. So we had this contact between the 2 hands and the end that was longer. So we measured pam, 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 and the last was longer, symbolizing that it should be longer. The syllable should be longer. You should stay longer on this syllable, right? And I think this worked quite well, but then you may want to adapt it to your own language, and see if it's helpful to clap on, accented syllable ones. I mean,
yeah, I was just going to ask, because as English doesn't have the same kind of pattern of last syllable being stressed. So if you had like beautiful, would be something like this, right? So stronger,
you can use intensity of clapping also. But when you use intensity, you should be careful that the sound of your clapping doesn't cover the sound of what you're saying. Yeah.
Right.
So it's a question of modulation.
Yes. Yeah. I think we have people, someone here, it was Maria. No, Maria was just thanking you. Lots of people were thanking you for your presentation. There's something about, okay, it's Yaula Jerebayeva. She was asking how we can reach out to you. If there are any institutional email in any way that people can write to you in the future.
Write to me. Yeah, sure. I'll write my current affiliation.
There's still like 4 or 5 questions, but as time is not always our friend, I'm afraid we have to start saying goodbye. And
maybe I could answer, if you don't mind, the one of comprehensibility and fluency, because I see that yes, Marike would like to listen about this.
So interesting, yeah. We have by Holly and by Marie. The one by who's? Holly, the one on comprehensiveness? Go for it. There was one-
I'll try to answer very shortly, but I think it's important because you want your learners to improve comprehensibility and fluency more than accentedness in the end. So in the case of the French study, I would say that the participants already had good comprehensibility and fluency. And I didn't show the graph because there were too many things to show, but there is an improvement, but it's not significant. Let's say that I believe that it's difficult to have significant improvement. We have these scales from 1 to 7 or from 1 to 9. It's very difficult to get significant improvement. But I think this tendency means that we are in the good direction. But the thing is that for these participants in particular, they were already intermediate, and Catalan and French. It's not that difficult for them, right, to be able to be comprehensible. If the last study on the English learners, Chinese adolescents, we had an effect on comprehensibility and fluency because it's easier to have larger differences in the scales when learners are not that proficient in the target language. Yeah.
Which seems to be a very good indication that it's especially useful for lower level learners.
Yes.
Ooh,
especially. Yeah. Definitely.
Good. Even better. Great news. Well, I think that's all we have time for. I would like to thank Florence Baills so much for your incredible talk. And if anyone wants to continue the conversation on this topic, you can comment or reply to a post dedicated to this talk on the Facebook page, Twitter, or Instagram channels. And please follow the links I'm posting in the chat now to your preferred platform. Share your thoughts and connect with others. And remember to use the hashtag PronSIG so others can follow your comments.
I didn't say it, but thank you very much for inviting us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so glad to have you. Just before we go, I'd like to remind you that if you're not a member already, you can find information about joining IATEFL and PronSIG or on our website. And this webinar will be available to view again on our YouTube channel early next week. So thank you all for joining us today. Huge thanks again to Florence, and until next time, it's goodbye from all of us.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for coming.